Okay. Hey guys, I'm gonna read you a story that doesn't rhyme. Okay, now I hope that's okay with y'all. I'm going to read you Dr. Seuss's The 500 Hats of Bartholomew Cubbins. Okay. Hold on, I'm not dressed properly. Okay. Now I'm dressed properly. In the beginning, Bartholomew Cubbins didn't have 500 hats. He only had one hat. It was an old one that had belonged to his father and his father's kingdom before him. It was probably the oldest and the plainest hat in the whole kingdom of Did, where Bartholomew Cubbins lived. But Bartholomew liked it, especially because of the feather that always pointed straight up in the air. Oops, I already lost my place. Hold on. The kingdom of Did was ruled by King Derwin. His palace stood high on the top of the mountain. From his balcony he looked down over the houses of all his subjects. First, over the spires of the noblemen's castles, across the broad roofs of the rich men's mansions, and over the little houses of the townsfolk, to the huts of the farmers far off in the field. It was a mighty view, and it made King Derwin feel mighty important. Far off in the field, on the edge of a cranberry bog, stood the hut of the Cubbins family. From the small door, Bartholomew looked across the huts of the farmers, to the houses of the townfolk, and to the rich men's mansions and the noblemen's castles, up to the great towering palace of the king. It was exactly the same view that King Derwin saw from his balcony, but Bartholomew saw it backwards. It was a mighty view, but it made Bartholomew Cubbins feel mighty small. Just after sunrise one Saturday morning, Bartholomew started for town. He felt very happy. A pleasant breeze whistled through the feather in his hat, and in his right hand he carried a basket of cranberries to sell at the market. I don't have a basket, I'm sorry. I have a shoe. Okay. He carried a basket. He carried a basket of cranberries to sell at the market. He was anxious to sell them quickly and bring back money home to his parents. He walked faster and faster until he got to the gates of the town. Don't ask me why I'm doing this with props. I'm in a weird mood. Okay. And it doesn't rhyme, so... The sound of silver trumpets rang through the air. Hoofbeats clattered on the cobbled streets. Clear the way, make way for the king. Make way for the king. Okay, the king's coming. All the people rushed for the pavements. They drove their carts right up over to the curbstones. Bartholomew clutched his basket tighter. Around the corner dashed 50 trumpeters on yellow-robed horses. Behind them on crimson-robed horses came the king's own guard. "Hats off to the king!" shouted the captain of the king's own guard. On came the king's carriage, on white and gold and purple. It rumbled like thunder through the narrow street. It swept past Bartholomew, then suddenly its mighty brakes shrieked. It lurched, and then it stopped. The whole procession stood still. Bartholomew could hardly believe what he saw. Through the side window of the carriage, the king himself was staring back, straight back at him. Bartholomew began to tremble. "Back up!" the king commanded the royal coachman. The royal coachman shouted at the royal horses. The king's own guard shouted to their crimson-robed horses. The trumpeters shouted in their yellow-robed horses. Very slowly, the whole procession backed down the street until the king's carriage stopped right in front of Bartholomew. The king... Oops. Hold on, wait. Okay. Hold on 1 second. Props, okay? Props. Just be patient. This could be a very good story. Okay. The king leaned from his carriage window and fixed his eyes directly on Bartholomew Cubbins. Well, he demanded. Bartholomew shook with fright. I ought to say something, he thought to himself, but he couldn't think of anything to say. Well, the king demanded again, do you not take your hat off before your king? Yes, indeed, sire, answered Bartholomew, feeling greatly relieved. "I do take my hat off before the king." "Then take it off at this very instant," commanded the king more loudly than before. "But sire, my hat is off," answered Bartholomew. "Such impudence," shouted the king, shaking an angry finger. "How dare you stand there and tell me your hat is off?" "I don't like to say you are wrong, sire," said Bartholomew very politely, "but you see my hat is off," and he showed the king the hat in his hand. "If that's your hat in your hand," demanded the king, "then what's that on your head?" "On my head?" Bartholomew gasped. There did seem to be something on his head. He reached up his hand and touched a hat. The face of Bartholomew Cubbins turned very red. "It's a hat, sire," he stammered, "but it can't be mine. Someone must have put it on my head." "I don't care how it got there," said the king. "You take it off." And the king sat back in his carriage. Bartholomew quickly snatched off the hat. He stared at it in astonishment. It was the exact same as his own hat. Same size, same color. It had the exact same feather. "I don't need a feather. I'm special." "By the crown of my fathers," roared the king. "Whoa, by the crown of my fathers." Again leaning out of the carriage window, did I not command you to take off your hat?" "You did, sire. I took it off twice." "Nonsense, there's still a hat upon your head." "Another hat?" Again Bartholomew reached up his hand and touched a hat. Come, what is the meaning of all this?" demanded the king, his face purple with rage. I don't know, sire," answered Bartholomew. "It never happened to me before." The king was shaking with such fury that the carriage rocked on its wheels, and the royal coachman could hardly sit in his seat. "Arrest this impudent trickster," shouted the king to the captain of the king's own guards. "We'll teach him to take off his hat." The royal coachman cracked his long whip. The king's carriage swung forward upon the street toward the palace, but the captain of the king's own guards leaned forward from his big brass saddle and grabbed Bartholomew Cubbins by his shirt. Away he flew, Bartholomew's basket. No! Away flew Bartholomew's basket. The cranberries bounced all over the cobblestones and rolled down into the gutter. With a jangling of spurs and a clatter of hote shoes. What's that? With a jangling of spurs and a clatter of horseshoes, the captain and Bartholomew sped up the winding street to the palace. Out of the narrow streets, up the hill, Bartholomew clung to the captain's broad back. On and on they galloped, past the bright gardens of the wealthy merchants, higher and higher up the mountain, on past the walls of the noblemen's castles. Flup! The sharp wind whisked off Bartholomew's hat. Flup, flup! 2 more flew off. Flup, 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 flup. Another. Oh no, wait. Good. Flup. And another one flew off. I know that wasn't really flying, but... 4,